Hello and welcome to another episode of Diaries of Badass Bosses. I am Tigz Rice.
And I'm Penny Joyner-Platt.
And we have something absolutely fabulous for you today.
Tell me more.
Well, you know how you and I both currently working on course creation and educational content in our brands?
Attempting to, yes.
Attempting to. Well, I mean, yours is recorded
I know.
in the process of editing.
Poor Connor having to listen to that dribble.
Mine is some thoughts on an Evernote page at the moment, but
Okay.
it's in the planning. But I thought we'd talk about course creation, content creation, and definitely the educational side of businesses, because I think there's it's definitely a big buzzword at the moment within sort of the business space. I think I don't know about you, but especially in the first week of January, I've lost count of how many sign up to my masterclass because I've got a course starting on the 20-something of January. So it's definitely a really big part. And I think there are very specific times of the year, now being one of them, of a lot of people are starting to think about courses and passive income, especially with if you run a business or a service-based business where time is of the essence. Semi-passive income, passive income is so important, but also that educational side of things as well. How have you found your course creation? You're currently going through the process, but how has that been for you over the last couple of weeks, month maybe?
Well, I suppose for me, because of the coaching side of what I do, it made sense to try and make it more accessible to people to be able to absorb the information in small chunks.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to digest it. And go away and maybe even put it into practice. So what I've done is I've created kind of like a video series.
Amazing.
It's kind of like how to do your own PR. So basically it's like broken down into, you know, how to write a press release, where to find a journalist, how to approach that journalist, what to do when they say no.
Yeah.
How to put together.
How to deal with rejection.
A video online news release, how to do a podcast, you know, so it literally is like just chunks of information in a very, you know, short kind of video format.
Yeah.
That obviously, who else would I do it with but the lovely Connor?
Who's giving a thumbs up behind the scenes.
But yeah, because as I say, I think being able to offer it in different ways, different formats, and make it accessible for people, because everybody learns differently.
Exactly, yeah.
I know I do, definitely. And also, I think some people who probably didn't like school or learn in a different way because they didn't enjoy the classroom setting, now they kind of find actually, no, I do enjoy learning. Yeah. It's just in a different way, and I didn't realise it when I was at school. So, yeah, so that for me, I'm excited. I'm still at the early stages, so I couldn't give you any feedback on it yet, but I'm excited to hear people's thoughts and, you know, how it will evolve. So, yeah.
My background, I've spent quite a lot of time over the year, you know, especially the last 10 years, speaking on stages. So I'm very used to delivering content, but actually I've never had any of that content on my own channels. I've always spoken for people or for companies or for brands. So this year is very much like, you know what? Like, I'd like a little piece of that pie this year. Like, I'd like it to be branded with my name and my logo on it. So that's where I am. And I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, because this person's been really influential in me actually getting out on stage. So one of my first speaking opportunities, especially sort of around the educational side of things, this person was actually the person who put that introduction into my lap and got those jobs for me. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And so, especially around the subject of educational content and content creation, I've brought the lovely Tony Harmer along today.
Welcome. Hi.
It is honestly such a pleasure to have you here. And yeah, it was right back, I can't even remember what year it was, but we were both speaking at an event. It was a fiesta.
It was designers, yes.
Designers fiesta.
Yeah.
And you I can't remember the exactings of it, but I know that you had an amazing opportunity had come up for you, and you were like, Tigz, how do you feel about teaching? And it was teaching courses or like for Adobe Certified Expert exams. I was like, I'll put you in touch. So that was how a lot of my educational stuff.
Wow, that's a while ago now.
I don't even know what year it was.
Yeah,
it was
I
a
think
long
2013.
time ago. Was it? Well, there we go.
2012 or 2013.
So,
Could have been
yeah.
either of those two.
Potentially,
Yeah.
But before we go too deep into that, let me give you a fabulous introduction.
Okay.
So Tony Harmer, aka the Design Ninja, is a multifaceted creative that has in the past been referred to as a creative Swiss Army knife.
Love
what
that.
a phrase.
Mainly because I open bottles.
As the founder and chief enchantments officer of Wizardry Limited, his CV includes an impressive list of career highlights across a range of creative disciplines, including, which I hasten to add are not limited to, print and online graphics, illustration, animation, communications, video, and digital content, with a particular focus in training and online learning. Between Tony's streaming channel, The Design Ninja, his role as a LinkedIn Learning author, and regular appearances as an Adobe Live host and presenter, his content has been watched by over 1.9 million people worldwide. And I'm sure we're going to be taking away some nuggets of inspiration from you during this podcast episode. So welcome.
Hey.
What an intro.
That was a lovely intro. Yeah.
So tell us where it all began.
Well, where I began?
Yeah.
Well, my mum and dad, who... oh, sorry, not quite that far back. Right.
We can start there if you want.
No, I'd rather
Maybe
not.
skip the first 9 minutes.
Wow. I actually started out making posters for punk bands and events. That's where I actually started. And then a friend of mine taught me how to operate an offset, a single colour offset machine. Mm-hmm. And so I was a press operator for a while. So I used to print stuff and then work in the studio. And I sort of moved sideways and sideways and sideways until I got into the studio. And then I went back into education. So I went and did some qualifications at that point. And I worked for the Royal Society for Nature Conservation on 2 of their projects for about 18 months. Then I got picked up as a concept artist by a concept and property development company. Properties, not like estate agents, but IP, essentially, stuff. So I worked on that, and then one thing led to another, and 43 years later, here I am, still doing the same stuff. I mean, I still do punk posters. If there are punk bands out there that need a poster, hit me up.
You heard it here. We're going to drop a little plug in there. I love this.
So, yeah, that's it pretty much. But I spend more time over the last 10 years of developing teaching around that. Because in this incredibly misshaped noggin that I've got, there's a lot of information whirring around in there. And unfortunately, I can't control it. It just keeps coming out and saying, like, do you want to share this? There you go. So that's it.
Amazing. And have you always wanted to work in the creative industries? Like, did you set out to be creative, or did it just come naturally to you?
My granddad taught me to draw when I was very, very young. I used to spend Saturdays over at my granddad's, which was actually here in St Evenage, in old St Evenage. And he taught me to draw when, I don't know, maybe I was about 5 or 6. Started teaching me to draw, and I knew I wanted to do that. I come from an army family though, and my dad had other ideas about where I'd spend the first 22 years of my adult life. I went for back in those days. Right. I mean, it wasn't quite that long ago. We didn't have a slate and a bit of chalk. We did have like biros by then.
Did you have your barrel handwriting pen though?
We did. Sit there doing patterns all day. I went to see the careers master. It wasn't because it was optional. It was obligatory. You had to go. And he said, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" And I said, "Well, I'll go in the army, innit?" And because I used to speak like that then when I was younger. And he said, "Right, is that what you want to do?" I said, "Well, no, not really." He says, "Well, what do you want to do?" And at the time, I wanted to paint and detail custom cars and motorcycles. That's really what I wanted to do. I was obsessed with magazines like Iron Horse and whatever that show these huge scroll work choppers and everything like that, these fantastic motorcycles. And and cars. And he said, well, you can do whatever you want. It's a choice. You can do what you want. And mapped out this route for me to do that, which involved a foundation, then an art degree, and I went home that day, as was typical for many families at that time. We were all around the dinner table by 5 o'clock, no later. And we used to just chat about things while things were going on. My mum asked me how it went, and I said, I want to go to art school. And I don't know how my dad interpreted that line. I suspect he had a load of other things going on in his head, but it didn't go down terribly well, let's put it that way. And shortly after leaving school, not very long after leaving school, within a year after actually leaving school, I found myself homeless, living in a wood with lots of other disenfranchised people. I mean, I was quite pretty when I was younger, so I didn't have to spend every night in the wood.
Love that.
And if you're still around, Mandy, hi. I still love you, Mum.
Please drop a comment below if
Mandy,
you're out there,
want to hear
Mandy.
from you.
So yeah.
Just having a moment then,
I was
weren't
having a
you?
moment. She was lovely. Her dad was a farmer. Her mum loved me. Her dad did not.
Probably not.
No. Well, I mean, people with
Where did you find him? In a wood.
People with 9-inch high Mohicans were very, very rare at the time.
I forgot about the Mohican.
Yeah.
I have to find a
Yeah.
photo.
Oh, I've got one I can share.
Perfect.
With here, so
Great.
you can have one of those. Well, anyway, I got into a spot of bother, as you do, and when I spoke to you on the phone earlier today and said I'd just had to pop in for a coffee with the man who saved my life, it's not a joke. That man actually did save my life. He was a youth worker, and he parented me from being 17 to being in my early 20s.
Yep.
And changed the entire course of my life, which
Wow.
wouldn't have lasted that much longer had I have carried on the course I was on. And an amazing guy, Pete, just fantastic. But I owe him and the woman who taught me to use the offset, Wendy, who lives in St Albans, I owe them everything, because without them, and this is sadly, it's a story for a lot of people like this. Doesn't matter how much promise they've got in one way or another. For a whole different bunch of reasons, that sort of thing can happen to anybody. But yeah, I do owe them everything. Everything started from them. So I didn't leave school and go to college. Is the essence. I was 21 by the time I went to college, and actually I was in bands myself by then. So I spent a lot of my time with music. Pete helped me to buy a bass, or taught me to play guitar. I wanted to be a bassist, so he helped me to buy my first bass, and then I got band. I was a singer in the first band I was in, but if you can call it that, a screamer.
I mean, I have heard some of your songs. We may get
the
to
ones
that
that I do
later.
now. Oh no, but I do actually sing on.
Yeah,
those,
you do,
like
yeah.
proper singing now.
Yeah.
Now, but I mean, that wasn't the singing I was doing when I was in the punk band. It was more yelling and sort of a mass
Artistic
depositing
yelling.
of angst on an unsuspecting world.
Who needs therapy?
And the frequent loss of my clothing for some reason.
It's in the woods
What it was.
somewhere.
We went in a Battle of the Bands, without a word of a lie, we went in a Battle of the Bands competition at a place called the Regal in Hitchin. It used to be a big venue in Hitchin, recording studios there. And I was quite often in there. I was doing all sorts of things. I used to paint people's flight cases and whatever for bands that were touring,
Nice.
like Cron Jan, and do that. I jammed with Captain Sensible in one of the studios in there on a piano. We had a great time doing that. But I was in the Battle of the Bands competition, and so off came my clothes. God, I don't know why I used to do that. No idea. Or they started coming off before the bouncers were on stage, and we were removed, and we got 3 points for originality, however. But we won't progress any further. I've overshared.
Never. You never
We're
ever
here for
share.
it. But it's
a
Don't
joke,
forget the shoe of silence. If you need to just silence yourself.
I was looking at the shoe of silence. I was trying to will the shoe of silence to come up and smack me in the face. But it didn't want to do it. It was having none of it.
Drop kick you.
But from that, essentially, I don't know, that's a soup of all sorts of things that were going on in my early years. But those two people turned it around. And then a friend of mine, I did actually go to the Army Careers place. I thought I'd be a medic in the Army. I didn't particularly have a desire to hurt anybody, but I thought being a medic would be a good thing to do. But the Army didn't require me at that particular time, let's put it that way. It said, come back in about 4 or 5 years. I'm like, okay, fine. And then a friend of mine got wind that I was trying to do that, and he said there's this new course, music course, going up in Derbyshire. And do you want to come on it? And I was yeah, I'll go wherever. It was, and went there, did that for a year, and then once I was back in education, I was still making artwork. But once I was back in education, I went and started out with fine art, and then thought I want to move into graphics, and so did from there. And then everything else that I've just told you, the RSNC, as it was then, it's called the Wildlife Trust now.
Yeah.
But all of that, and that, by the way, was one of my favourite jobs, that job with the Wildlife Trust. The money was diabolically bad, but the spirit inside of it, because everybody was working towards that common goal thing, was just gorgeous. Gorgeous. If I could go back to that job with a reasonable level of money, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just a lovely thing to do.
Amazing.
So there you go. And that's it in a nutshell. I mean, there's loads of little bits in between, but you can have me back on another time.
What a journey, definitely. I think it's fantastic.
Make it episodic.
Oh no, it's wonderful. I just and I love the fact as well that you are constantly remembering those people that have got you to here.
You should never forget
the people,
exactly. On your journey, never.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit, because I'll be honest,
Yeah.
you two are the geeks. Well, you three actually are the geeks here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to learn a lot today because I am not so much a geek. I'm constantly phoning up Tigz going, what have I done? I've broken something on Adobe. What does this button do? So forgive me for but hopefully that's the point of this, is that anyone listening as well gets to learn. So I'm going to read it out. Hang on. Right, here we go. Between Design Ninja, Adobe Live, and LinkedIn Learning, creating all of that educational content as well is obviously a huge part of your career. So was it a conscious choice to kind of follow that path?
I was, so when that happened, I was already working as a trainer. Mm-hmm. So what had happened was, between maybe like the mid-90s and the start of this millennium, I'd spent a lot of time and energy in learning as much as I could about languages and applications, right? So we're talking about structural markup languages like HTML and things like that, and then later on CSS and all of that stuff, but learning about applications. And I was very lucky in that I got onto that at that particular moment in time, because that's served me really well. I don't know how that would have fared if I'd have been much later than that. But I then became the guy who knew, I was like, the people at Adobe refer to him as the Adobe guy at work. Mm-hmm. I don't like, because I've worked there, I don't like being referred to as, I still love the company, but I don't want to be the Adobe guy. So I knew loads of things, and then people said, well, can you teach us to do that? And I thought, I'll give it a go. And then in 2000, I actually went and did a 2001, I went and did a teaching qualification. I did a 7407 City and Guilds in teaching adults in the lifelong learning sector. So I actually had an idea of how to teach properly, but I was already training with those things. So I was delivering training all over the place. Then Adobe in 2004 picked me up as a freelancer. So that's how long I've actually worked.
Wow. Yeah.
With an at Adobe is 2004, so that's like 20
years
this year. I know, maths was never my strong point by the look on my face.
Oh yes, maths, no.
But no, so they picked me up to do events, and I discovered really early that I loved doing that, and I still do love doing that, especially because I can camp it up as much as I like, and everybody's on board with it, and I love it. So I really enjoy that side of things, and dressing up, which is another thing I like doing. So
instead of dressing down.
instead of dressing down. Yeah.
There are
No, but,
costumes, personalities.
I mean, you've seen some of the outfits I've worn on different things, like that flying helmet
Yeah.
that stuck with me for a couple of years. I just loved walking around in that, apart from one occasion, which I'm happy to share later on if you want. But
Yes, please.
it was for a dare in LA, let's put it that way, and I did it. But anyway, you know, it's a dare. I'm a grown up.
I'm a grown-up. Of course I said yes.
but yeah. Will you run half a mile to the Marriott and go for a meeting in the Marriott in whatever heat it was at the time, like 35 Celsius or whatever, with your flying helmet and your leather jacket on? I said, yeah, why not? And I walked into this meeting, looked like a hot, sweaty mess with a flying helmet on. And one of the guys there knew me and knew I was a bit of a character. The other guy, who was the more senior guy, did not. And man, he spent the whole meeting just staring at me to say, I don't want to even hear the sound of your voice because you're clearly
Not one of us.
not one of us. And I thought, well, actually, you know, and I was kind of guessing what he was thinking and thinking, yeah, you're right, I'm not. If we were having some sort of telepathic dialogue, that's how it would have gone. You're not one of us. You're right. Oh, God. All you need to do is say, go away, and I'm gone. But sadly, no. Anyway, that was the dare story. But back to that journey. So 2010, I went to a conference in Washington, and there was a thing called Ignite. Ignite is the thing, right? So Ignite, you might have seen them yourselves. You've got, 90 seconds or something like that. I can't remember how long the things are. And you have slides that advance automatically every so many seconds. And I was doing something on forms in Adobe InDesign, which at the time, if you were creating a form in InDesign, you basically had to build the form and then take it across into Acrobat and turn it into an actual workable form. And then if you needed to make any changes, you had to like rinse and repeat that whole cycle. And I thought, why can't you build that into InDesign? And so I'd written this presentation, a load of slides that were all sensible and had like diagrams and charts and reasons and bullet points, all of the things that my presentation course is the biggest course I have, far and away. But all of those things that I now say, don't ever do that. I was on a plane flying over there, and I was reviewing this presentation, and we'd been bumped up to business on there. And so I was sat in this type, which was great. And I was reviewing this presentation, because it was nice, because I was in isolation there, and I could just like review it. And I thought, this is bad. Mainly because I used to drink back then, and mainly because I'd had maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever grosses at the time. I thought, oh no, this is too boring, this isn't me. So I started changing it, and I wrote a 14-verse poem. I turned the whole thing into a poem in iambic pentameter, and then started changing all of my slides. And what I couldn't change on the flight, I started sketching out. Anyway, I went and did this Ignite presentation, delivered the poem. I had the poem on my teeny-weeny iPad or phone. I can't remember which it was at the time. Whichever one existed in 2010, it was that one.
I don't think
it would have been
iPads
the
were
phone.
around.
I think it would have been the phone.
Because the iPhone came out in around 2000. Well, yeah, because I was
Wasn't the
working
iPad
at Apple
2011? The iPad might have been 2011.
I feel like I was there in 2009-ish.
Yeah.
And I was going to say I don't remember the iPad being
I've just
there.
actually watched the BlackBerry film.
Have you?
Amazing. Yeah,
Right.
It's really good.
Well, anyway, I had it on my phone. So you could, I had everything on my phone just in case, you know, that I needed it. All that. So given that I'd only turned it into a poem within the 48 hours leading up to that particular presentation. And so I just started out with this poem, did the poem. People started clapping when I finished. I turned around. Anne-Marie Concepcion was on the sound desk, and I turned around and started handing her my mic back, and she said, "You should turn around." And I turned around, and the whole place was on its feet, losing their crap. over this thing, and it went on and on and on and on, and it's like I walked back to the back of the room where I was, and they just applauded me through the whole thing. It was mental, and it didn't end there, right? So I went to the bar afterwards. Loads of people wanted to buy me drinks. One of the people was from lynda.com, right, who wanted to talk to me, not then, but said he wanted to talk to me later on, which he did. But the following day, Chris Kitchener, bless him, who was the current InDesign Group product manager at the time, he was doing an Ask Chris session on the main stage, and so the whole conference was there. I mean, the whole conference was there the night before, pretty much anyway. So, but definitely the whole conference was there for that. And Michael Ninnes, the former InDesign product manager, was sat next to me. Him and Colleen Wheeler from which she was working at Wiley, then was sat next to me, right at the very back. And the mic was going around the room, and the mic came to Michael put his hand up, and I'd presented at different events with Michael before, so he knew me anyway, and he put his hand up, and the guy brought the mic over to Michael, and Michael got up and he said, "This is all very good, Chris," and this was awful, right, because he was the former InDesign product manager who'd gone to lynda.com, talking to the current group product manager, and he said, "This is all very well and good, Chris, but what this entire conference needs to know is when are you going to do what he said," pointing at me. And suddenly the whole place got up again and just started applauding. It was absolutely surreal. I was like, oh, stop. Because I wasn't
So you were
drunk
famous.
then. I was famous then. Oh, man. Anyway, so that's where I got... Lynda.com scouted me from that particular point. I got an appointment with... So Chris said, I will get an engineer to speak to Tony, and gave me a time, strangely enough, with an engineer called Michael. Right, so it's like mics all around this whole thing. But anyway, I went and sat with this engineer, and he said, "Look, I've got to tell you that this is technically impossible. Yeah, it's not going to happen." I said, "But why? What? InDesign's built on XML. Yeah, it's got a structure. It's got why can't that work? Forms have a structure." He says, "Yeah, but to put all of these different things in," and there was a product at the time called Lifecycle Designer, which was a sort of an enterprise level Acrobat thing. And it's the sort of thing that the Department of Social Security, for example, here would use with a forward goal to releasing online forms, right? So, that can have sections in and all of these different things. And I'd been working on that. I was qualified Acrobat instructor anyway at the time, so which was funny because people thought I worked in a circus. But it's kind of weird. But no, it's not that Acrobat. I'm sorry. No, looking at me thinking we don't look like an Acrobat. But anyway, there you are. Anyway, I said to Michael, I said, no, I think you've got it wrong. I said, I'm not talking about this kind of forms that Lifecycle can do. There's a thing called an acro form that you can build in Acrobat. And so that's an Acrobat native form, but it doesn't have all of the logic around it that Lifecycle Designer has. Yeah, so that's a very, very powerful product. Yeah, that you can talk to it with the logic that you need to do it. So if the user has clicked this and this, then move them off to this part. Don't serve that part up, right? So, but it didn't need to be that. I said, look, most of the designers who are working on these forms, they just need a simple form for a customer inquiry, that kind of thing. I said, so why can't you build it on that rather than, I think the other one was called XFA, and why can't you build it as an acro form? And he suddenly stopped and looked at me and he thought, wow, do you know what? He said, and he just said he'd investigate it. And that was that he'd look into it. And then a few months later, I was presenting for Adobe Olympia, and a friend of mine there, Jonathan, we went to the pub afterwards, because that's what you do when you're at that sort of thing. And a friend of mine took me to one side and he said, officially, not supposed to tell you this, and Jonathan, I'm really sorry. I'm not mentioning your second name, though. He said, they're going to build your forms thing into InDesign. And he said, you are the first person in Adobe's history to single-handedly change the roadmap of a product.
That's incredible.
And so just about a year later, because then it was 18 months development cycles in ship, between development and shipping.
Yeah.
It came out and the forms thing was in there, and the guy from lynda.com was saying Holy Grail has been found, la la la, on this thing and this blog and whatever else. And shortly after that, they said, do you want to record a couple of test movies for us? And then started doing that, and apparently got all right at doing it.
Yeah, and kept going.
Kept going. Yeah, no one's discovered yet that they don't need me. That they do.
Well, you're consistently coming up with new and inspiring content.
Thank you.
How much of your week is spent learning new skills and processes versus content creation?
Every day, for at least 15 minutes, without exception. There is no day in which learning is not a part of my day. Yeah. As for how much, it's difficult for me to set, because some things 15 minutes is enough.
Yeah.
Some other things really catch me, and I might end up spending all day on doing that and investigating it.
Is there a particular software package or plugin or something that's catching your eye right now?
Lottie Creator. So Lottie files are an excellent SVG animator. Stickers that you use on your messaging apps in your phone, those kind of things. So it's the sort of stuff that's on Telegram and WhatsApp and all of that stuff. The chances are they're made in Lottie. It does have a drawing environment, but the drawing environment is at the current time reasonably crude. Mm-hmm. But you can overcome that by using an application like Illustrator that will export to SVG, and then you can just bring that in and animate that individually, and it's super, super lightweight. I mean, you can do that in After Effects as well, but then you've got to get plugins to export that in the right way, whatever.
So have you been using that to create your own Memoji stickers, and do they exist, and when do I get one in a test?
There is, but the Tony Harmer sticker set has only got one sticker in it, and that's Nice Tony. That was so a friend of mine, Julia Seeger in Germany. She started building a Tony Harmer sticker set. Now that's a fan.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But she did Naughty Tony and Nice Tony. But we did with the we animated Nice Tony live on Adobe Live. So we did that.
Yeah.
So I showed how that worked. It had been she'd drawn it on an early version of Illustrator on the iPad, and structurally it took some doing that particular job, but you don't have to do half of that stuff anymore to do these. But that was a challenge. But that basically it's me dressed as a nun. With the periscope of further investigation. It has different names, but that's its main name, right? So,
and it's actually worth pointing out at this moment, like, so the Adobe Live content you do, which you can find on Behance and also on YouTube, it is actually completely free to view, and there is. I'm going to go with
hundreds. Show ran for 2 years.
There's hundreds of episodes that you can find for free. So if you are looking for that particular episode or anything else that you might want to learn any sort of Adobe skills as well, you can find all of that.
I think that's the thing is, like, all of our listeners, like, I think some of them are probably like me going, what?
Oh, sorry, I'm
this
sorry,
is kind
I'm
of
sorry.
like, but it's genuinely because, knowing that there's, I think for anybody, knowing that anything that is going to help us learn, because I'm, every day is a school day. I'm constantly like, I'm so keen to grow my knowledge, and I know everyone that listens to this show, that's the whole reason they listen, is is to know more. So where is it that we need to go if we want to find these wonderful free learning tools?
Oh, you can just go to YouTube for those and just search Tony Harmer, or just try the Tony Harmer show. I think
amazing.
You find them there.
Tony Harmer's show.
Tony Harmer's that Tony Harmer with the Tony Harmer show with Tony, open quotes, Tony Harmer, close quotes, Harmer. Which is
such a mouthful.
Tim. Oh no!
And then there's the Tim and Tony show.
Tim and Tony show.
And you've also got the Design Ninja.
Yeah.
And Design.
Oh, the Work Smarter Not Harder Dojo is part of
That
the
one?
Design Ninja property thing. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, type Tony Harmer into Google, honestly. Like,
I
I
know.
was doing this for the questions. Like, so many videos. Oh, I got lost in. There were some good videos that popped up.
There is some very funny videos.
Yeah.
See, I used to like dressing up in those. Adobe had a thing. They let me go with it for a little while because it was pandemic, and they were just thinking, anything keeps people watching. We started having Fancy Fridays, and that's because one particular
Fantasy or fancy?
Fancy Fridays.
Friday.
Fancy Fridays. Because I turned up for one of the things wearing, I can't remember what costume it was I was wearing. I've got a dressing up room.
Of course you have.
You're not. I don't think you're old. I don't think you're old enough to remember Mr. Ben. But Mr. Ben used to be a children's program where this bloke used to go into this costume shop and try on a different costume and end up in that world. He'd come out of the dressing room and he'd be in that world. So if you went in, put on a cowboy outfit, it'd go back through the curtain and suddenly it'd be in the wild, wild west.
To look this up.
Epic. See, the 60s and the 70s really did have it going on. In expand. Anyway, let's. But anyway, so I did that particular thing, and then Emma, who you know, lovely Emma, who had only recently. I'm so hard. She'd only recently taken that job on. I think she'd just come out of her. She'd worked for Adobe Stock before, and then she'd come across to Adobe Community and Adobe Live. And I can't imagine what was going through her mind the first time she saw me on camera with whatever it was I was wearing. I think I had a top hat, steampunk goggles, like the ones you photographed me in those goggles before, and a ukulele. And I sang to Rufus Deutschler and Emma about editability and repeatability in using structured design. So, using styles for things instead of that. And I just started playing the ukulele because they're all infinitely editable. The jing jing.
Oh my gosh.
I know, that's probably what was going through her mind.
I'm going to be Googling for that.
That telepathic conversation would have probably been her going like, oh God, and me going, beep, signal not found. Anyway, so they let me dress up on Fridays, and they made a thing out of it. It became Fancy Fridays. They were encouraging the community to dress up as well. And so I did a show as a Viking. That was kind of funny. So I was dressed fully as Viking in this thing, but with a sort of a soft kids Viking helmet thing. And a letter opener sword that was about this long, about 20 centimetres long, but I held it close to the camera.
So it looked huge.
So it looked like a big sword. Right, it's that 4 lions trick thing, and holding it close to the camera. And I was going, I got this sword, but I'm really disappointed with it, and then pulled it away from the camera, and it became obvious it was a letter opener. I said, this is what happens if you don't read on Amazon. Read the dimension. But anyway, I did Viking, a pilot, a spaceman. Still got a space helmet in my studio, and our mutual friend Nick came into the studio and goes, oh, space helmet. I said, yeah, ready for instant fancy dress, because inside the space helmet there's a hoodie that looks like an astronaut's clothing, and then there's the amusing sticker in the back of the space helmet. It says that this does not offer protection. I thought, so basically don't wear it in space. Who knew? But yeah, spaceman. All sorts. And for a while I was called Colonel Tony Tangent because of the tangents that I go off at.
Really?
Yeah, I'm still known in some circles as Colonel Tony Tangent. By the way, I really want to watch your course, and I want to find out what it's like, how to find a journalist and engage with a journalist. If that's changed over the years, because back in the day for me, all you'd do is sit next to them and go, do you want another?
Yeah.
Same again.
Yeah.
And that's how you do it. So I'm going to watch yours and see how much that's changed.
Well, I was also going to say, in terms of like young people as well, because I mean, my little boy's only 4, but I've got 2. But
that's probably too early to actually make him attached journalist.
But
you can't send him to a bar.
But he's literally,
Where's the milk?
He's obsessed with drawing. Like he is drawing constantly.
Good.
He watches drawing on
Yeah.
YouTube Kids. He just adores it.
Yep.
Like he's just so into it. So as a mum, I'm like, I want to invest in that, you know, if that's something he really loves. But for anyone that's young and thinking like, I really want to get into this world, what advice would you give them?
Well, draw is one thing. 2, don't don't look at what's out there at the moment and think, I can't do that, because you might have something that is new and original. And this is the thing, we all draw, all of us. If you've got the ability to hold something to make marks with, yeah, we all draw when we're kids. You will have drawn as children at school, you will have done it. But at some point, usually around the beginning of your secondary education, there'll be somebody there who can draw very well, in quotes, right? You know, that they can achieve some form of realism, which is the bar that some people seem to press on themselves, thinking, oh, this doesn't look very realistic. If it's expressive, it doesn't have to look realistic. But at that particular point, you watch a person who can, quote, really draw, unquote, and you switch off because you just think, well, I can't do that. You don't know how much coaching and tuition they've had to do that. You know, you don't know, like these days, you don't know if they've been watching YouTube like all the time to learn how to do that. Don't allow yourself to be switched off by that. Actually look at art over the 20th century and now. Look at what's happened there. Picasso, in my opinion, could really draw. But there are people who would argue against that because they see that the exact move away from any form of photorealism. I was having an argument about this just actually with my best friend, saying about generative AI, well, that's just fine, you know. So I'm going, well, no, it's not. But anyway, we had this thing, and he said, but it's just like the invention of the camera stopped people from painting. And I was like, Picasso. Yeah, and, you know, the invention of the camera made achieving photorealism much easier, but it's an art form in its own way, as you well know, Tigz. It's, you know, it forced people to reevaluate what they thought about in the terms of expressive drawing. But you will not, exactly the same with photography or any art form. If you don't do it, you're not going to get any better at doing it in however you want to express yourself. Go to galleries, look at art. We've got some of the best galleries in the world in London. And better still, most of them are free to go into. You know, they're funded. And we're in the, I don't want to get on a political soapbox at all, but in our current climate of education where we seem to be focusing on just things like, hey, you interested in working in finance? Yeah, in that current climate, they are deprecating the arts. Yeah. So while we've got it, use it. Yeah. And art is one of the things, does so much for you, does so much for your mind. It does so much for you processing things. And this is one of the things I'm at odds with. And I was at odds with this when I was at Adobe with digital drawing and working on those surfaces, is that it's too immediate. You can start to make something too quickly, or you go too far down the road. Whereas if you bring it right the way back to using pencils, you've got to actually think about what you're doing because there's no undo and that stuff. So you have to process it. It does a lot for you. My childhood, I've already indicated that one particular thing that was difficult, but there was a lot of my childhood that was difficult and behind closed doors. And being able to draw, that gift that my grandfather gave me actually helped me to deal with a lot of that stuff because I could create things that took me away from that and maybe made me as resilient as I seem to have become.
I think also the power of being able to draw or picture what there are words that sometimes you don't want to say out loud, but sometimes actually drawing the artistic representation of it can be a really great way of getting out. You know, if journaling's not for you, for example, it might be that you draw a picture every day. Yeah.
Well, there's nothing wrong with journaling with drawings. It's how I make notes. I've had people watching me when I was learning to be a teacher. I've had people watching me and going, what are you doing? Why are you drawing? Why aren't you listening? I said, I am listening. But this is how I record information. Yeah. This is a hook for me. I don't need to write 200 words. I've drawn these two things and I know exactly what they are. At some point, in fact, I can even share those with you. I'll share you some of my mind maps from when I was learning teaching, because I'd then go home and I'd draw those out more fully.
Yeah.
Yeah. And In fact, Tony Bazan, the guy who created the Mind Man books, I got offered that job of illustrating those books to start off with, and I just looked at these diagrams and went, no. Oops. He didn't offer them me, but the person who was dealing with it offered them to me, but I declined that. I went, no.
So for anyone out there who's currently in the process of creating content,
Yeah.
do you have any do's and don'ts in terms of how to create a great course, like for something,
Yep.
getting someone to actually listen and take in that information?
Okay. Well, the main things to do are obviously plan it first. Don't just sit down and start recording content. There's lots of people who try and do that, and it's just really evident in when you watch their stuff. So plan it out. Plan the pathway that you want people to follow. So you are here at this particular point. I would like you to be here. Always remember that they're the main event, not you. Yeah, it's the person or the people that are consuming your content. They're the main deal. Yeah, you are becoming part of their journey, and you have to respect them and respect the different places they may come from. Everything about them. Yeah, so you have to make sure that when you're actually planning out the content, it's as inclusive as possible. Nobody wants to see a course that is just, for example, arbitrarily white men all over the place. Immediately that would knock off half of the population straight away, if you were looking at that based on gender, at least half. It would also then, for everything that course full of white people white men would erode those things. That doesn't look like me. It has no meaning to me. The thing that I started including about 4 years ago purposely was more people who are differently abled in there, because that was an oversight of mine for the first sort of 5 or 6 years, and I just thought, well, I've got people of colour in there, I've got a good mix, and I tend to have a female bias purposefully in my courses because women are underrepresented in almost everything in the world of work, sadly. That is changing, but it's changing on like geological time. It's not quick enough as it should be. So I had that, and I just looked at what I had, and my producer Susan is amazing, and we talk these things over, and she's very good at steering me without actually steering me. She says, well, have you ever thought of this? And it's just like, oh yeah. But then I started including people. I thought, there's nobody in my courses who are in wheelchairs. There's nobody in my courses who has less than 4 limbs. All of these different things. So I started purposely including those. So be as inclusive as you can, because that person on the other end is more likely to want to consume your content if there's some link to them in that courseware. You don't become just another person that's talking to them but ignoring them. If you see what I mean with that balance. Use the voice and language that is appropriate to as many people as you can. I mean, in a lot of what I teach, which are things around using software, there's some degree in which you can't avoid using technical language. And also, if you do have to use technical language, use the correct technical language for it. So, for example, there used to be another instructor who used to teach Illustrator, which has 2 primary selection tools. There's a selection tool and a direct selection tool.
Yep.
One of them had the icon for it is a black arrow, the other one is a white arrow, and he stopped using the term direct selection tool. And just
that's such an important term when
I know,
discussing between the two of them, and they're right next to each other on the toolbar as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can just go the one at the top and the one at the bottom.
No, and also if you've got them in a different array, if you've got them in a single column, then they're above and below. So you have to bear that in mind as well. But he'd say the white arrow tool and the black arrow tool, which is fine while you're learning with him. But what you also need to think is, where are they going to branch off from? Where are they going to learn more? Hopefully it's with me, but I might not actually provide what they need at that time. 2, they might prefer to try a different learning style for the next steps onwards. And I think it's important that you give them, so if they suddenly decided they need to Google something on the white arrow tool or the black arrow tool, it's going to limit what they get back. Yeah, so use the correct language. If you can't avoid it, and with a technical term like that, you have to. The only one that I change, and I do mention both of them, is leading. I talk about leading as being interlinear space because I think that's more progressive. Leading is a term that goes back to when people were making hot metal layouts, right? So they put when they were typesetting, you know, those things like when you have a John Ball printing set or whatever, and when you're a kid and you get little tweezers and you make a thing up and then you make a stamp. But they did that, but with actual lead letters and strips of lead that went in between to change the line spacing. And that made sense at that time, but I'm not sure it makes sense in the modern world. And that's the only one I do change. I say leading or interlinear space, and then I refer to interlinear space after that because I think that is more progressive and it applies to not just typesetting in that way, but in terms of the delivery of type, you know, to an end user via a screen and whatever else. So those things. But yeah, so watch the language you're using. Bear in mind your audience. Think about what people would like to see or what would help them forward. So my course is on LinkedIn Learning. Almost all of my courses, the content that you see on screen, you have access to that, so you can download it and explore it. And I hide stuff in it. I put things in there.
Little Easter eggs in.
I put Easter eggs in, always. If you go to any of my Illustrator courses, and the one that's about navigation, there are always things hidden in there, but sometimes you have to look really, really closely.
Oh, so you know if someone's done their homework.
Yeah, well, yeah. Last year, what was it? Last year or the year before? There's a thing. I think it was last year. Yeah, so it was for the 2023 version of Illustrator. That one had like a cross section of maybe part of London, a city, right? So just at the top, you could see some skyscrapers, but then you were looking at a cross section of the ground and all of this pipe work going through it. And if you go down towards the bottom right-hand corner as you look at it and you zoom in close enough, there's a dinosaur skeleton in there. And you might see the dinosaur skeleton teeny weeny, but if you actually zoom in on the dinosaur skeleton, it's holding an iPad. So it's just some of the things are tiny and stupid, but other things give you tips, you know, like this is not the thing you are looking for and whatever else. There's just tiny little bits of text. But there are loads of things, and I do encourage people to open them and examine them because they can see how I've built things. Because quite often they're not the standard way of building them. I'll build things for maximum flexibility, which is my most popular thing to talk about at Max in LA in fall. This year I did 5 complete shows on that. They were all rammed. It's good fun because people are learning, and while it's a big ask because it is kind of complex. When you're introduced to it, but the more you do it, the more you'll think, I see how that works now, you know, and you'll be able to do it yourself and make things super flexible. But yeah, think about what they're looking at. Yeah. So the language you use is really super important. Being inclusive, super important. Think about what they're looking at. What's going to engage them? Yeah. If it's just like a red square and a yellow circle, arbitrarily, there's loads of other colours available. But I'm just saying that if you use those two things together, that's not really engaging. Not especially not. And also think about how many seconds have eroded while you're talking about something and looking at the same thing. Yeah. And just finally, back on the language thing, also think about people who may be reading the subtitles of what you're doing. And that doesn't mean that they're hearing impaired or deaf or whatever. Some people, for a number of reasons, might not actually be able to listen to the audio.
Yeah.
So
I have subtitles on everything.
It's the way now, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah. But just bear that in mind when you're building your content. So if you've got full screen content, try and leave an area that is discreetly, it doesn't have to be empty, but discreetly devoid of detail if you can.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't do it in every single thing. But just always be thinking the subtitles are going to be in this lower third. Yeah. Typically they're going to be 2 lines long because they change quite quickly. Yeah. And that's how much you can consume in that span. But just keep it in mind because it won't hurt. And to the people that matter, which are the people that are impacted by those things, in any of the things I've described, inclusivity or thinking about stuff, all of those things, they will know that you're considering their needs as you're doing it. And that's what, in my opinion, changes you from being an okay or a good instructor to a great instructor. And that's when people fall a tiny, tiny little bit in love with you and what you do. And they're much more likely, that makes my thing sound formulaic and mercenary. That isn't how I think about it. Yeah, I want them to get the best they can out of doing it. I want them to consume the content, but once they started doing that, they've already bought the thing. Yeah. That doesn't mean I like backpedaling and go, well, you bought that now, and here's lesson 4. You look at your own notes, that kind of thing. You want to keep them. You want them to come back for the revisions of your course. Every 2 years, you need to turn your course around. You need to redress it. You need to take into account things that have changed in the 2 years, because 2 years these days is...
It's a lot of time.
Yeah. A lot of time.
Well, I think on that note, we've definitely got so much more that we
I'm sorry, I'll do waffle on. So much. This is so much more than I bargained for. Will you please point at that shoe?
No, I think it's just, there's so much in terms of like what we could cover. So I think it would be fabulous to bring you back so that
I'd
we
love to come
can
back.
cover so much more, because I know that you've probably answered a lot of things for people, but people have even more questions for you. So I actually think it would be really fabulous if you do have any more questions for Tony, because put them in the comments below, and then, as I say, it'd be great. Then we can do some tailored, specific stuff on, because you just cover such a plethora of things that I know it's really fabulous and helpful to everybody. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. We will be back next week, as always, on Wednesday.
Yes.
So tune in. It'll be you and I.
Yes, it'd be just the 2 of us.
I know.
Just the 2.
Well, we're actually going to be talking about niche audiences.
Yes.
So all about understanding who your audience is and actually how you go about doing that, whether you are a startup or whether you're actually already in business and thinking, actually, I don't even know. So we're going to have a bit of a chat around that. So
Can't wait.
Yeah, so tune in. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we will see you very soon.
Thank you.